Happy Wednesday, ladies and gentlemen. Allincrypto here, and welcome back, guys, for another jam-packed daily market update. Bitcoin seems to be hanging in there, and we've continued to say until Bitcoin falls out of its uptrend, invalidates it, it's still in one, and we are very much expecting this just to be a pullback, and a recovery is to follow. And we can derive this not just from Bitcoin dominance, the total market cap excluding Bitcoin, the altcoins and how they are positioned and what we think comes next. But we can also look at the macro picture, technically what we think is ahead for the S&P 500, and more broadly, the economic landscape that we're moving into in 2026, which is one that I think is fueled by earnings, potentially a little bit of inflation, and actually which is good for earnings, and actually a accommodative Fed, which are going to provide liquidity to the markets through lowering interest rates, which the probability for in December has actually swung massively in favor. It was sort of 50-50 and actually towards them not cutting earlier. And actually you see them adding a little bit of balance sheet to support the sort of financial system. We think it's not a bad picture that you have ahead of us, and that this is just a pullback in what is still a very much intact broader uptrend. People calling for a bear market, I believe, are going to be wrong. Of course, I would say that believing that we're going to see trend continuation, but time will tell. There's no confirmation that a bear market is in my opinion. And actually, with Bitcoin making this sort of recent pullback, which is the most brutal out of the 5 that it's had thus far, that the bears have been wrong on every single time, the daily sentiment index reached a low. And every time it's gone down past the, I think it's about 25 line or 25 mark, you can see the arrows here. And we've had one again today on this pullback that I think is ultimately going to lead to upside continuation. There wasn't just fear indexes and fear barometers showing up for Bitcoin, but the macro markets more broadly, which we think have some pretty nice upside ahead of them. Certainly the S&P we think is in a new bull market, having engulfed the bear market that it was in earlier this year. And I think actually the macro picture is one where small caps do well, the more real economy does well, not just the AI kind of Bitcoin sector that can be seen via CapEx. Large cap tech stocks really have been the beneficiary, and the majority of the rally that we've seen for the S&P so far, really from 2022 onwards, has been led by AI and kind of more large cap narrative driven. I think Bitcoin's the same, but I think there's more of a real economic push coming that should see things do well more broadly. Let's get into a little bit of news. Texas reportedly kicks off state Bitcoin reserve with $5 million IBIT purchase. More wild stuff. A $10 million budget, be careful Rupert, allocation for Bitcoin was approved under the SB 21, with the reported 5 million trade representing the reserve's first step towards deploying those funds. The Bitcoin fund would join just 2 other traditional holdings under the state's trust, including nearly 700 million in SPY. And I think this is a great step. It's not 700 million that they've got in the SPY, the S&P 500, but it's certainly a step in the right direction. And we talked about narrative just there in regards to why Bitcoin has performed so well and altcoins really haven't. We haven't seen an alt season yet. And I think the reason we haven't seen an alt season is the same reason we haven't seen a PMI cycle. I've been looking at a lot at this with my patrons in regards to how the macro picture, I believe, is a supportive one for the cryptocurrency space moving forward. I think it's going to throw the Bitcoin 4-year cycle out with the bathwater, as it were. And we're yet to be proven right on all of this. We've been right on the markets thus far. Alts have been a little bit more tricky. But I think we do get full confirmation of the bias that we hold. And we shall see. The beautiful thing about markets, and one thing that I've been taught via markets, is to be humble and admit when you're wrong. And we're still saying we're not wrong on our bull thesis just yet. We've been very right on it for Bitcoin. Certainly a lot of our altcoins are still elevated today. Our portfolio as a whole is elevated. We are actually looking at certain stocks. There's a couple that I think are going to do sensationally. Do become a patron. Now's a great time. We are going to be upping that subscription substantially, because we haven't now for a while moving forwards. Certainly, if this just proved to be nothing short of a pullback or nothing more than a pullback. Very, very interestingly, we're going to dive over to Richard Werner. He's the individual that I believe wrote The Princess Yen, which is a good book. This tweet shows how central Bitcoin is to the entire cryptocurrency markets. This is from JPMorgan. This is from Zero Hedge. Crypto is moving away from resembling a venture capitalist style ecosystem to a typically tradable macro asset class supported by institutional liquidity rather than retail speculation. One speaker noted that it could potentially reach $240,000 over the long term, thus indicating its multi-year growth plan. And does this drive us away from the 4-year cycle? It's interesting. I've got books that came out in the 70s on trading that actually talk and investing that actually talk about the 4-year cycle way before Bitcoin was even a thing, because there's macro cycles that play into the BTC cycle. Here's what they have to say. This is from JPMorgan. Crypto is emerging as a tradable macro asset class. Crypto is moving away from resembling a venture capital style ecosystem to a typical tradable macro asset class supported by institutional liquidity rather than retail speculation. In the early stages, crypto projects received large private rounds of funding, and few were structured to trade in a liquid, scalable way. With retail investors buying late after valuations had already risen sharply, retail investors' participation has fallen, and the space now depends more on institutional investors to stabilize flows, reduce volatility, and anchor long-term prices. Cryptocurrencies still present investing opportunities. Bear in mind, they don't just single out Bitcoin here. As they are relatively liquid yet structurally inefficient. We saw that with the 10th of October, which was a horrific event that was, I believe, in my opinion, I think Binance had a major role to play in that. That's the player I think Tom Lee was talking about. And they, of course, did actually make payments to individuals after as kind of sorry payments, as it were. Anyway, inefficiencies and liquidity remain uneven, resulting in large price fluctuations. Cryptocurrency prices are now more influenced by broader economic trends rather than crypto's predictable 4-year halving cycle. Interesting take from JPMorgan here. The process where the rate of new supply of Bitcoin is cut in half and followed by a bull market rally. One speaker noted that it could potentially reach $240,000 over the long term, thus indicating its multi-year growth plan, suggesting we're moving away from the 4-year cycle. And that happens to be our take also. I think there's been a stunting of that cycle. There's going to be an element of it, of course. Bitcoin supply adjusts, and that's been what moves the space. But I think if you look at the crypto space generally, it's really been Bitcoin, Bitcoin, Bitcoin. It's been the narrative, just like large caps have been the narrative for the stock market and for equities generally, and that's why they've done well. Bitcoin's been the narrative for crypto. I think there's that broadening in the economic conditions. We'll look at that just now. But I also think that there's going to be a moving away from Bitcoin. And actually, you're going to see, I think dominance in the future comes down to probably 20-something%, because there is a real innovation going on here with cryptocurrencies. And despite all the volatility, that still remains. And we're here to keep everybody on that path, on that straight and narrow. Because I believe that there's an amazing opportunity here. This is from Tom McClellan. He says, you can doubt it, just as you should doubt everything. I like that take. Here is a 2015 analysis of every ZBT signal, which is an indicator from the 1928 period to 2015. And you can see just how accurate this is. And of course, one of these has now flashed up again today for the S&P. Here we have the S&P 500s are incredibly strong, or earnings are incredibly strong. I think earnings continue, and I think actually small caps outperform large caps, but you generally get this buoyancy based on earnings, based on a more inflationary environment. Providing there is a tipping point with that, but I think the Fed's going to induce a lot of that. I very much agree with Mike Wilson's take on all of this. And we think there are absolutely brighter days ahead of you for markets moving into 2026. And I think there's a kind of real economic... One reason I don't think alt's done well is because the real economy hasn't done as well. Small caps, more kind of economic sensitive stocks, and I think alts fall into that. But I think there is that upturn or uptick coming, and we're seeing that in regards to small cap stock earnings and a number of other things. I think that's going to generally give buoyancy to everything. And crypto is a beta of, certainly altcoins are beta of macro markets, real economic growth, so on and so forth. And there's this kind of more broadening or breadth coming to the equity market. And I think in the same way that I'm expecting, I'll show you some really cool stuff here. The Russell, which is planning out in the way that we expected it to outperform the S&P 500, which is really a barometer or a signal that we're going to be in this bullish environment. I'm also expecting BTC DOM to really lose ground, and we believe this is now in phase 4, and you've got this tremendous time ahead of you. And they're quite similar. You know, you could look at alts in the same basket as small cap stocks, and having similar drivers, and you can look at the S&P in the same, or large tech stocks in the same manner of Bitcoin. And I think there's this kind of, again, breadth to both markets coming. And I think we're starting to see the signs of that, and I think that's going to propel crypto next year. And I ultimately think that this is, again, just a pullback for the cryptocurrency space. Certainly Bitcoin, and unfortunately with crypto, as JPMorgan highlight there, it's very volatile, it's very inefficient. But there is a time when that changes, and the opportunity is here, that you get to be involved before all that change occurs. That gets me damn excited. Hopefully it gets you too. We're going to be here every single day. We're here at a time where, if you look at sort of crypto media outlets, they're either capitulating completely, or they're reducing massively. And actually, we have hired people recently. We're going to continue to grow and thrive in this space, and that's thanks to you guys. Thanks a lot for watching, everyone. I'll see you all in tomorrow's Daily Market Update.